Controlling your anger is simple, actually, according to the ancient Stoics, though at first glance it can feel like one of the hardest things in the world. When rage flares up, you might think you have no choice but to lash out or let your blood boil. The Stoics, living in tumultuous times of political unrest and personal strife, discovered that anger does not arise from the outside world or from others' actions, but from the judgment we impose on events. They insisted that we can choose to remain calm, no matter how provocative a situation seems, because our inner perspective stays within our own power. This idea can feel shocking if you are used to believing that anger automatically explodes whenever someone insults you or a situation goes wrong. But the Stoics would gently remind you that while the initial spark of annoyance might pop up, only you decide whether to nurture it into a raging fire or let it fizzle out. This shift of perspective, from blaming external factors to focusing on your mental stance, is precisely why controlling your anger is much simpler than the modern world often teaches. Once you accept that the real cause of your anger is not out there but in your own judgments and expectations, you gain the key to unlocking a calmer way of life. In daily experience, it is common to say someone made you angry. You might tell yourself, "He was so rude, how could I not be furious?" The Stoics would gently challenge that assumption. Epictetus, for example, taught that people do not have direct power over your emotional state. Rather, they have power only over what they say or do. You hold the choice of how to interpret it and how to respond internally. This does not mean you deny that the other person behaved badly. It means you see that your anger arises from the belief that you must defend your pride, that you have been personally violated, or that the situation absolutely should have been different. The Stoics saw these beliefs as optional. A person's rudeness might be real, but your feeling of being obligated to respond with rage is not. You can simply observe the rudeness as a manifestation of that person's ignorance or malice and choose a rational, composed approach. That might involve speaking calmly to address the issue, setting a boundary, or if possible, walking away. At every stage, your mind remains your own. Epictetus said that once you realize people's words do not define or injure you unless you let them, you become immune to the chain reaction that leads to anger. This is simpler than letting your emotions be a puppet pulled by each external string, because you reclaim the power to decide how something will affect you. Some might object that this sounds like suppressing your feelings. The Stoics, however, never advised pretending you do not experience the initial pang of annoyance or indignation. Instead, they taught that while the first flash of emotion may be involuntary, it is the subsequent elaboration, the fanning of the flames, that lies within your control. If someone insults you, you might feel an instant twinge. The Stoic approach says, do not impulsively trust that twinge as a call to arms. Take a breath, notice the feeling, and then question whether it is truly beneficial to let anger take over. Typically, you see that it solves nothing to blow up. Anger might lead you to say or do things you regret, or it might escalate the conflict further. By choosing calm, you keep the mental clarity to decide your next step wisely. That clarity is the heart of Stoic discipline, a discipline built not on harsh self-punishment, but on consistent awareness that your mind is not forced to yield to every emotional tug. This indeed makes controlling your anger simpler than you assumed, once you realize you have a choice the moment you sense the emotion rising. Marcus Aurelius, a Stoic emperor juggling wars and political conspiracies, found that daily reflection helped him keep anger in check. He often wrote about encountering difficult or ungrateful people, reminding himself ahead of time that such encounters would happen. By anticipating them, he robbed them of their power to shock him. This daily mental preparation is straightforward yet effective. In your own routine, you might begin the day by calmly acknowledging that you could face stressful drivers, rude colleagues, or household tensions. Deciding in advance that you will not let these things destroy your inner state is enough to shift your perspective. Then, when the day throws a frustrating curveball, you recall your morning resolution. I knew such things might happen, and I already chose not to let them rule me. The predictable wave of anger does not wash you away because you saw it coming. The Stoics would say that if you do this consistently, you train your mind to stay calm under pressures that once sparked rage. That training is not complicated. It takes small daily acts of mindful acceptance so the pattern of reacting with fury gradually dissolves. Seneca, who lived through political turmoil and served a volatile emperor, wrote extensively on anger. He saw it as the most destructive emotion because it blinds reason and drives people to destructive extremes. Yet he insisted anger is a voluntary emotion. Once you see how it is formed by your judgments, you can unlearn it. He noted that many times we become angry because we expect the world to follow our personal rules. If we are cut off in traffic, for instance, we treat it as a personal slight, an outrageous breach of how drivers ought to behave. The Stoic approach flips this perspective. If people are often reckless, does it make sense to become enraged each time, or is it more rational to acknowledge that this is a predictable reality and remain unbothered? Seneca believed that by changing your assumptions about how others should act, you reduce the occasions for anger drastically. It might initially feel like letting rude behavior slide, but in reality, you are saving your emotional energy for constructive responses. You can still speak up if you witness harmful actions or if you need to address someone's mistreatment, but you do so calmly, not from the vantage of personal outrage. That calmness ensures your words and choices come from clarity, which ironically is more likely to achieve a positive outcome than flying off the handle. Epictetus used to describe the difference between external events and your internal interpretation. A Stoic practicing anger control does not roll over passively, but remains watchful of how the mind frames what is happening. If your boss criticizes you harshly, you might feel a surge of indignation. But Epictetus would say that your boss's words, in themselves, are just sounds. The emotional force you attach to them, your sense of personal attack, stems from your judgment that you have been deeply insulted. If you step back and see that your boss might be speaking from stress, ignorance, or a misguided attempt to push you harder, you free yourself from taking it as a mortal blow. You can glean what is useful, maybe some part of the feedback is correct, and discard the rest. By doing so, you remain composed, and your boss sees someone who does not react with fury at negative feedback. This level-headed approach can improve workplace relationships more effectively than hot-tempered defensiveness. Epictetus believed that once you master this technique, you realize your calm is never truly threatened by others. The only threat is your own unexamined reaction. Marcus Aurelius added another dimension: transience. He wrote often of how brief life is and how soon all will pass, including whatever triggers your anger. In the face of that cosmic perspective, fueling your rage seems pointless. Are you going to spend your limited time on earth fuming about a trifling slight or a neighbor's annoying habit? He concluded that anger steals the precious moments of life, while a more detached acceptance grants you the mental space to do what matters. This viewpoint is simpler than letting every inconvenience or social friction rankle you. By remembering that life's clock keeps ticking and that these irritants are but minor episodes, you mentally let them go. Letting them go might mean you address the problem calmly if needed, or you ignore it if it is inconsequential. Either way, you do not let it fester into a roiling anger that devours your day. This perspective is not about escapism, it is about clarity. You see your finite existence as too valuable to waste on repeated cycles of rage. People sometimes assume the Stoic approach is about suppressing emotions entirely, but that is not accurate. The Stoics recognized that we feel impulses, such as an initial flash of anger, but they insisted we need not feed those impulses. They taught that reason can step in, evaluating whether indulging the emotion will serve any rational purpose. If not, we let it dissolve. This is not hiding from feelings, it is harnessing the mind to guide them. Over time, the habit of letting anger fade becomes natural. You might sense the old triggers, but the chain reaction never fully ignites. That, in the Stoics' view, is the definition of emotional freedom, not being at the mercy of every passing jolt of irritation. By cultivating this freedom, you actually experience a more balanced emotional life, able to respond with genuine compassion or even playful humor in situations that once triggered outbursts. Epictetus also warned about the danger of self-justification in anger. We often defend our rage by claiming it is righteous, or that the other person truly deserves it. The Stoics recognize that this rationalization is a trap. Whether or not the other person acted badly, losing your composure rarely helps fix the situation. It often escalates it or clouds your judgment. If something truly needs addressing, a calm approach stands a higher chance of success. The notion that your anger is righteous might feel satisfying, but from a Stoic vantage, it is still an emotional indulgence that can lead to regrettable words or deeds. By staying level-headed, you keep the possibility of a constructive resolution open, rather than turning it into a battle of tempers. Epictetus believed that even in the face of genuine wrongdoing, your best move is to remain calm. That calm can disarm the offender and signals that you are not easily manipulated or rattled. Marcus Aurelius also found a way to transform potential anger into empathy by recalling that people rarely choose to be malicious purely for its own sake. Often, their negativity arises from ignorance, fear, or deep emotional wounds. This does not mean you approve of their behavior, but it allows you to see them more like a patient who needs healing rather than an evil demon. That shift of perspective can diffuse your anger and open a path for more patient handling of the problem. If you want to maintain boundaries or deliver consequences, you can do so effectively without a heart steeped in hatred. In a sense, you solve the problem, but you do not contaminate your mind with seething fury. This approach is simpler than fueling the fires of vengeance or condemnation because it spares you the inner turmoil. You remain free from bitterness, which is consistent with the Stoic goal of preserving your mental well-being. Seneca, in his essay on anger, described how destructive it can become once it gains momentum, comparing it to an avalanche picking up speed. The key is stopping it early. If you notice your frustration rising, you intervene right at the start with a gentle, rational pause. Maybe you breathe, recall a Stoic principle that the offense is not truly about you, or think about how indulging anger rarely solves anything. By halting that first wave, you prevent the chain reaction that leads to full-blown rage. This is not complicated, though it does require self-awareness. The Stoics believed that self-awareness is a daily skill, nurtured by reflection and small mental exercises. For instance, you might decide that whenever you feel your heart rate spike or your face warm with irritation, you will take a 2-second pause to question whether the anger is worth acting on. That tiny pause can break the cycle, letting your calmer self step in. Over time, this becomes second nature, and controlling anger ceases to be an agonizing effort. It flows from the repeated practice of not letting the avalanche form in the first place. Modern psychology echoes many of these Stoic points, confirming that anger is a complex mix of learned responses and personal beliefs about fairness or respect. The Stoic method of focusing on your interpretations and maintaining a pause before reacting aligns well with contemporary techniques for anger management. The difference is that the Stoics wrap this practice in a broader philosophical framework that sees emotional mastery as part of cultivating virtue and reason. They believed that each time you resist giving in to anger, you strengthen your moral fiber. This synergy between emotional control and moral growth gives the Stoic approach a uniquely holistic charm. You do not just quell your rage, you refine your entire character. The payoff is a self that is not easily undone by petty triggers and a life that is less overshadowed by conflict or regret. Because anger often arises from pride, the Stoics also taught humility. They reminded us that we have our own faults, that we too have probably offended people in the past. Realizing we are not morally perfect helps dissolve the sense of righteous indignation that feeds anger. Of course, you do not let wrongdoing slide unaddressed, but you do it without that sense of superiority that often ignites fury. Marcus Aurelius urged seeing yourself and others as fellow humans struggling with ignorance or burdens. That perspective fosters patience. You might still correct or set boundaries, but from a gentler place. This is simpler than waging wars of moral one-upmanship. It quiets the emotional storm and paves the way for more effective communication or mutual understanding. Some might fear that controlling anger means letting people walk all over you, but the Stoics made it clear that you can stand up for what is right without being consumed by rage. You can politely, yet firmly, refuse to let someone mistreat you. If they persist, you can walk away or escalate the matter rationally if needed. The crucial point is that you do not feed your own emotional fire. Doing so only clouds your judgment and might spark more aggression from the other side. By controlling your anger, you actually gain more leverage. You can choose your words with precision and calm, which often commands more respect and diffuses potential violence. Far from being weak, it is a sign of mental strength to remain poised when others are losing their heads. The Stoics prized this as a prime display of virtue, combining self-restraint with moral clarity. In the end, anger management does not require a labyrinthine process or an iron will. The Stoics show that it hinges on seeing that the root cause of anger lies in our own mental judgments rather than in external events. Once we shift our perspective to that truth, the solution unfolds naturally. We learn to pause, question the illusions fueling our rage, remember that we have control only over our own mind, and opt for calm. We do not become doormats, but we keep our dignity and composure, which ironically often leads to better outcomes in conflicts. This discipline, practiced daily, soon feels more natural than the old pattern of flaring up at every perceived offense. We realize that what once sparked fury no longer has the same hold. The cause for anger might still appear, but the chain reaction halts before it consumes us. Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius all lived through chaos and difficulty, yet they proved that controlling anger is achievable through consistent mental vigilance and a simple shift in how you interpret provocations. By internalizing their lessons, you too can find that anger no longer controls you, that you greet provocative moments with unshakable calm, and that your relationships and personal serenity improve. It is not an unattainable ideal. It is a practical skill that can be honed bit by bit. The next time someone or something triggers your temper, you can remember the Stoic principle that your response is your own domain, that the culprit is not the event, but your belief about it, and that you can remain serene if you choose. This is why controlling your anger is simple, actually, once you see it through the Stoic lens. It just calls for that initial change of perspective, that quiet recognition that you hold the reins of your internal life. Over time, you come to see the old triggers as powerless, and your day-to-day experience gains a tranquil strength that cannot be easily shaken.